Everyone. Yep, Crystal's going to record us. Yeah, very, very excited to be here this morning, and just want to thank you all for taking the time to be on this Zoom. Ka nui te mihi kia koutou. Today's kaupapa is composting, and this is the third in a series of online wānanga that we've been doing. The previous one, the first one was with Paul Murray, who's on here, and that was about food waste and food waste in the compost versus in the landfill, and the kind of impact of those two situations. And then the second one was with Sam on Sam Te Tau on the different styles of composting. And so I haven't seen Sam come in yet, but so you might have been at one of those two. This wānanga is about Hauota me Waro, or nitrogen and carbon, which are the two of the essential and fundamental building blocks for most composting methods. Just a couple tikanga rules to keep us on track. So Crystal is recording this event, and the reason for that is we had a lot of registrations, but not necessarily everyone can come on the day, and so we're providing the recording for them. If you're a bit shy, or maybe you're like bunking off work to come to this prestigious wānanga, you don't want your boss to know, case why you can put your camera off, that's all good. And the other thing is that you're all on mute by default, and that's just so we can keep running things smoothly with no interruptions. Engari, in saying that, the chat is open for pātai. So chuck your questions in there, and at the end of the session, we'll go through questions. But yeah, nō reira, let's go. Te mahi Wairākau, te Hauota me te Waro. Right, hopefully you can all see the slideshow, but just let me know if there's an issue. So in any composting system, yeah, and so if we think back to the ones that Sam's gone through with us, cold compost, hot compost, bokashi, worm farm, trenching, which is when you're just putting your food scraps in a trench in the ground, and all these kind of composting systems, there's millions and billions of tiny microorganisms that are doing the work of breaking down the food waste and processing and recycling it into accessible nutrients and matter that the plants need. How I had it explained to me that really made it click for me was that food scraps in themselves, if the nutrients that are within them cannot be passed to plants as they are in the form of food scraps. They have to go through the composting process to make the nutrients within them accessible to the plants. And so, yeah, how I got it explained was, it's essentially one way of doing that is worms eating it. So worms eat the food scrap, and then the stuff that comes out the other end of the worm, that has the nutrients that are accessible to the plants. Yeah, so to make compost successful, we need to make sure these microorganisms have what they need to make the process of composting work. And so these two essential ingredients for those microorganisms are nitrogen and carbon, or Hauota me Waro. And first we're going to go through what both those things are, how to tell if something is carbon or nitrogen, and then what role they play in making compost. And yeah, it might be a little bit confusing, because I might give some examples of stuff that you thought was carbon, but I'm saying it's nitrogen, or vice versa. And that really is because all organic material, all plant matter, has both carbon and nitrogen. It's just a ratio that's different, and that's how it's the ratio that determines how we categorize it. So I might say something's nitrogen, and that just means it has a really high ratio of nitrogen compared to the amount of carbon it has within it. Yeah, and I was going to mention something else quickly. Oh, and it's going to be a reasonably short wānanga today, depending on questions. But if we finish early enough, I'm really lucky to be based here at the Hihiawa Cultural Centre in Whangarei, and just across the grass from me is our community compost. And so if we finish early enough, I'll take you guys for a trip over a virtual trip across the grass to see the compost, and you can see some of these processes in action if you're keen. So yeah, tuatahi, hauota or nitrogen. Oh, sorry. Just to be clear, we're going through what nitrogen and carbon both are in some ways to tell. So nitrogen, hauota, one of the ways it can be described is kakariki or green. And this, in saying this, it's like I'm meaning green as in alive or living, a living thing. So like a green twig on a living bush, you can't burn it, eh? Like, you know, when you, how to tell if a plant might not have any leaves on it, but how to tell if it's really dead is you like break off a twig, and if it's still green on the inside, then it's still living. And saying that, and using the word kakariki or green as a descriptor for hauota, it's kind of confusing because it doesn't necessarily mean all nitrogen is green. So some examples are bananas. Bananas are yellow, but they are nitrogen. And that's that whole, they're living in a way, they're still alive. And another example, carrots, orange, nitrogen as well. Beetroot, purple, nitrogen. So kakariki, green as in living. Māku, as in wet. So again, it's not necessarily like wet from a tap. It's more that the thing has water inside it, inside its cells. So for example, a living plant still has water inside its cells. A banana peel is squishy, juicy on the inside. Potato peelings, even if they're starting to dry up, still have water in them, eh? So it's wet as in it still has water in its cells. Māku. Yeah, and the third kind of descriptor for what might be considered hauota or nitrogen is fresh or mauta, meaning it was recently alive. So you recently picked it, chopped it, peeled it, cooked it, baked it. It was recently a plant. So all fruit and vegetables are examples of nitrogen for compost. And I think a key, no, I won't go that, I'll go into that soon. Anyway, yeah, so takariki, māku, mauta, green, wet and fresh. Those are kind of some essential descriptors for hauota or nitrogen. And usually when you have an item and you're wondering what category it is, these three can usually help you determine if it's nitrogen. So carbon is kind of the opposite to nitrogen. It's not green as in living. Instead, the color we use to describe it is for something that's been dead for a long time, completely dried out with no water left in them. So yeah, the color we usually use to describe carbon or waro is praone or brown. So most plant matter that has completely dried out or lost all of the water from its cells goes brown. So think of hay, sawdust, wood chip, bark, dry grass, twigs, firewood. So just quickly, we might think, like a good example I like to give people here is grass. So when grass is freshly cut, it's green, it's usually wet and pretty fresh, and so it goes in the nitrogen category. If we leave that grass to dry out for a while, it eventually turns brown, it dries up. That indicates to us that that ratio of nitrogen to carbon is now heavily in the carbon realm, and so we consider that carbon. So the same ingredient can fall into different categories depending on its state. And that's not just grass, that's any plant matter. So things that have been made from a plant have been made from a plant, can also be considered carbon. So that's things like paper and cardboard. So these things are highly processed, so that they don't necessarily contain living bacteria and microorganisms that say a dead twig or a dead leaf contains, but they can still be used in the composting process. So they're still carbon. Yeah, hopefully it's all making sense so far. So next word, so they're not wet like nitrogen, the opposite, like I've said, maroke, dry. So there's no water left in the cell, it's completely dried out. And the last word, kope whakamutunga, mate, so it's dead stuff. And again, dead can also mean things made from a plant, e.g. paper and cardboard. So a kind of important thing I've learned in my composting journey is, I guess you have unprocessed carbon. So that's stuff that you get directly from your garden, maybe twigs, leaves, dry grass. It's been recently dead, I guess. Yeah, it's been recently alive and it's just kind of died out, but within your garden kind of area, I guess. And this is different to processed carbon, which is things like things like cardboard and paper. So yeah, plant matter that has been processed. Both are still carbon because there are still a lot of nutrients and microorganisms within the natural or unprocessed carbon. They are more beneficial for your compost. So you can use carbon and paper, but it is more beneficial to your compost to be using natural or unprocessed carbon. And so in our community compost, you'll see when I take you over, we use both. So we use a bit of wood chip, a bit of sawdust, and then a bit of paper shreds. There's a bit of compostable packaging in there. So a bit of both. Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, so now to test if you have been listening, essentially. So for the next few slides, I'm going to test if you think something is hauota, nitrogen, or waro, carbon. So for each picture that I show you or example that I give you, if you think it's hauota or nitrogen, thumbs up or fingers up. Up is the direction, and for waro, carbon, down, down. And if you got your camera off, Katie Pye, I think you got a reactions button, and there might be a thumbs up on there, and maybe there's a thumbs down on there. So yeah. So tēnei tukitia, he aha tēnei. Do you think this picture is hauota, nitrogen, or waro, carbon? Beautiful. I'm seeing lots of thumbs up. Yeah. Yeah, that's totally right. That's nitrogen. Food scraps are nitrogen. Me tēnei, nitrogen, hauota, carbon, waro rānei. Yeah, carbon. And so, yeah, you got the paper, you got some brown grass clippings that looks like egg cartons. I love egg cartons in our compost. One of the reasons being sometimes when you put too much flat paper or like shredded paper, it's compact, means the air can't move around very easily. Egg cartons have like air pockets, a lot of air pockets, and so they allow flow more easily and things to move around more easily. Yeah, love egg cartons in the compost. Okay, and now I want to go through these examples. So I'm just gonna move that out the way. So we'll do kind of like a quick fire round, I guess. So kota or sawdust. Remember, hauota up, nitrogen up, carbon, waro down. Yeah, so kota is carbon, karete or karate, nitrogen, right? potato peelings. Yeah, Hauota. Ota weeds. Yeah, this is a trick question. Nah, it would usually be nitrogen unless you've let them dry out. And then same as those grass clippings, once they're dry, no water in them and they're all brown carbon, but generally nitrogen. And with weeds, a lot of people wonder about putting weeds in their compost. The best compost for weeds is a hot compost, and you have to be getting up to about 60 degrees. You can buy compost thermometers online from we got our one from Carbon Cycle to test if you're getting up to those high temperatures, and you have to get to that high temperature to kill off the weed seeds. So if you're putting weeds in your compost. And then we got grass clippings. Everyone's like, this is a trick. Yeah, same thing, Nitrogen, Hauota if it's fresh, freshly cut, Waro if it's dried out. Pungarehu, ash. Yeah, sorry, I'm just watching to see what everyone says. Yep, it's carbon. Nice. Oh, sorry. Panana, banana. Yeah, food scraps, nitrogen. Is it a poaka kāri so cardboard box? Yeah. So people that are putting cardboard in there, compost, highly recommend not to, everyone's compost is their own. I'm like a huge supporter of that. You are the king of your own compost. But I guess my recommendation is to not put shiny cardboard in there. And that's because that kind of, sometimes that layer that makes it shiny isn't plastic. It can be like a plant-based kind of film, but it is often hard to tell, and it doesn't break down that easily. Worms don't like eating it. So yeah, we don't, for me, I recycle that shiny cardboard rather than putting it in the compost. I stick to things that are like matte color, like just plain paper, egg cartons. Sometimes those paper bags, you get the paper bags from the shopping. I try and reuse those as many times as possible if I get them, but if they get wet and soggy or anything like that, they're good for the compost. Yeah, okay, what was I up to? Fresh leaves, so just recently been cut, green as, Hauota, old twigs, they've been lying around for a little while. Yeah, Waro, apple core, nitrogen, old leaves, same as old twigs. Yeah. Okay, peke tea bags. Yeah. I'm like, I don't think I read the notes on this. I'm like trying to look ahead. Tea bags, I think, are nitrogen. Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. I'll take that as I'm good. I think tea bags are nitrogen. I don't put tea bags in my, I'm hoping, Paul's gonna correct me if I'm wrong. I don't put tea bags in my compost because it's really hard to tell if they have plastic in them these days. Some tea bags say plastic free. If it doesn't say plastic free on your tea bag box, the assumption is that it might have plastic in there, and that's like to hold the tea bags together or in the lining of the tea bag. One of our kaiarahi based in Tokomaru Bay, or is it Tolu Bay, Penny Campbell, he says his one kind of tip for people that are on their parakore journey to make a change is to go away from tea bags, is to start drinking tea leaves. And they're quite easy to buy now in the shops. You can get them in supermarkets now, which you used to have to kind of go to the special bin in and stuff, but you can get tea leaves now in the shop. And yeah, you can buy little holders for them, or you just put it in your teapot. Kapai, tissues. Yeah, Waro, carbon. This one brings up, sorry, I'm just like going off on little tangents. I hope you don't mind for these items, but tissues brings up a good kind of talking point that you might want to have with whoever uses your compost. And so ours here is a community compost, and it's part of our cultural centre, which is a kaupapa Māori centre. And so we follow Māori tikanga for our compost, which means nothing from a wharepaku goes in our compost, and nothing from humans, like no hair or no fingernails, goes in the compost. This is different to other people because those things technically are compostable. Paper towels from the wharepaku, toilet rolls are technically compostable. But yeah, it's not in line with our values because eventually the compost we make gets used for kai. So yeah, just something I find it's a really good thing for when I'm setting up a compost for a rōpū to discuss what is the tikanga around your compost, what do you want people putting in there, what do you not want them putting in there, what is it going to be used for at the end product, what is the end product going to be used for, that kind of thing. Yeah, new paper, newspaper, last one, yeah, Waro. And so it's funny, this one's on there. I kind of, it made me think when I seen it. I have an uncle who is pretty staunch against us putting whakapapa in newspapers, and his thing has always been because newspapers end up in the toilet often, like, you know, someone's reading newspaper in toilets, but same thing, like, for some people you might want to think about what might be in that newspaper if you want it in your compost. These are just some of those kind of discussions you have as you start getting further into your journey. And so, for example, I was really privileged to be part of a composting wānanga, and you have to forgive me, I forget the name of the matua, but he was talking about how they don't allow any processed food into their compost because they don't know what chemicals have been involved in those processes. They don't know what ingredients are in all those foods. So they only put in food scraps from kai that they've grown in the garden. So they keep that circle real small in their garden. Yeah, just trying to encourage everyone to, as you go on your composting journey, you start thinking more and more about what's going in it and what you want that end product to be. I put processed food in my compost, just so everyone knows. But yeah, just wanted to share some examples of other things that's happening. Yeah, cool. I think we got them all right, except for I just want to see, oh yeah, tea bags, nitrogen. Yeah, so there's the answers. Pretty sure we got them all right. Any ones you're confused about, just chuck them in the chat and we can have a korero about them after. Okay, and so why do we want to use these things? Why do we put these things in our compost? Well, to compost effectively, you need these things really. Organisms that decompose the organic matter use carbon as a source of energy, and they use nitrogen for building their cell structure. Yeah, and so they need more than carbon. Oh, they need more carbon than nitrogen. And so you might often hear people talking about the ratio of carbon to nitrogen. And I've heard different things. I've heard probably the most common one I've heard is 30% nitrogen to 70% carbon. And if that's in a compost, a hot or cold compost. If you're doing a worm farm, it's usually the opposite, or even less carbon. So you want lots of food scraps, not much carbon. But yeah, so that kind of ratio, I'll be honest, at our compost, we probably do about 50-50. The way you can tell if it's working, your ratio of carbon to nitrogen is working, is you get good compost essentially. If it's really smelly and wet and there's lots of fruit flies around and you can see lots of decomposing food, you probably need more carbon to help dry it out a bit. If it's just like a pile of dry, nothing, like there's nothing happening. We had that last summer here. We weren't putting in enough food scraps and there was a lot of carbon going in and it was just hot as, and so it was just this pile of dried up carbon essentially. So yeah, you can kind of figure out that ratio as you go. And how we do it here is we add the nitrogen and then the carbon. So when we notice that it's getting a bit too many fruit flies or it's feeling a bit wet, like wetter than a sponge kind of thing, add more carbon. And that's just because it's so hot up here. Where you might be colder, and so you might want to keep the carbon flow pretty strong. And yeah. What else do I want to say? Yeah, so for microorganisms, essentially, these are the building blocks of their life. And so from nitrogen, it gets its proteins and genetic material and cell structure. Yeah, what else was I going to say? Oh, so when you learn about composting, you might hear this thing called a lasagna, the lasagna method. And you go like carbon, nitrogen, carbon, nitrogen, carbon, nitrogen. And yes, we do support the lasagna method. And saying that, compost happens when those two layers touch. So when carbon and nitrogen mix. So if you are having like huge layers of nitrogen and then huge layers of carbon, that stuff in between, the carbon that never touches the nitrogen and the nitrogen that never touches the carbon, the composting process is not going to happen. So if you're doing the layers, keep them reasonably thin so that the nitrogen and carbon can mix together, because that's where the magic happens. And the reason you might have heard this lasagna method and that people talk about it so often is about keeping a good ratio. The lasagna method helps people keep a healthy amount of carbon to nitrogen to carbon to nitrogen, rather than just filling up their bin with nitrogen or something. So yeah, that's kind of where the lasagna method comes from. Yeah, so yeah, greater surface area and contact between the two. Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about, sorry, I just had some notes about like composting errors, which is like if it's smelly, if it's a mucky kind of wet pile, again, probably too much nitrogen, you need to add some more carbon. And if it's super dry, same thing, opposite thing, too much carbon. Yeah, so dry carbon helps regulate the moisture and the oxygen levels in the compost, as well as balancing out the acidity which nitrogen brings. Cool. Yeah, well, Pātai question time. So I think the idea is I'm going to come off share screen, stop sharing, and then I think Crystal has messaged me the questions. Yeah, thank you, Crystal. So first question I've got is, what should we do with the tea bags? Stop using them. Nah. Well, yeah, that is the best option, like just buying tea leaves, or you can buy like reusable tea holders. So I have like a metal one. You can just put a spoonful of tea leaves in there and then close it up and then put that in your mug. Or I was recently bought some reusable cloth tea bags, and they're just like little drawstring bags, but mini. And so you can fill those with tea, close it up, and then wash it out afterwards. But yeah, otherwise, if you really want to buy tea bags, try and keep an eye out for plastic free on the box. That's the only way you can really be sure. Or if you are, my father-in-law loves bell tea. I'm not going to be stopping him from drinking bell tea. And so unfortunately that goes in the landfill bin. that's where it ends up. And now I see another pātai. Even though the tea leaves and the tea bags have been dried out, they're still considered nitrogen. It's a really great question. I actually don't know why it's considered nitrogen. Do you, Paul? Like, even though the tea leaves are dried? Sorry, I'm just going to invite Paul in. He's like composting genius.
Yeah, kia ora tātou. Not genius, still learning, always something to learn. I just put a note in the chat there. I did a quick little investigation from that pātai, and tea is considered a nitrogen. If you think of nitrogen as being anything that contains a nutrient content, and you think of carbon as being something woody, that just the woody remains from the carbon that it's captured, something you would burn. So even though tea is dry and it's brown, which were two of the descriptors, when you wet it, it's like reactivating it and it releases the nutrients into tea. So there's still a nutrient level. So it's considered a nutrient. I mean, it's considered a nitrogen. And I've also popped in the chat just something from Kai Cycle. Yes, I talk with the idea that, get off tea leaves and single-use stuff and, tea bags and single-use stuff and use tea leaves and tea pots. But if you are dishing up tea bags, there's Kai Cycle's guide there to the tea bags that do not have plastic in them from their own research. So ones that are safe to compost. That's just in the chat. Kia ora.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, so hopefully that answers the question about tea bags. And then I see there was another question. What would you do with the likes of here instead of putting them in your compost? So we have like a tree at my house, like a pahutakawa, and we just kind of bury any hair beside that, and we cut our nails by it. So yeah, just it's not that it can't go back to nature, it's just that we don't want hair involved in something that's going to be used for kai after. So yeah, we return our hair and our nails to the earth, but just in a place that won't be used for kai by us or by anyone in the near future. So yeah, that's just down from our house, a little pahutakawa in front of our house. But totally up to you, and because there will be other things like that should be returned to earth, but the compost isn't the place for that. So for example, here at Hihiawa, there's a carving workshop, and there's been a lot of discussion around the sawdust that comes out of our workshop. And so our tohunga whakairo, our master carver, says that that sawdust and those wood chips have come from carvings, which are taonga, which are tapu. And so that sawdust cannot go in the compost, which will be used for food. So instead it goes out, at the moment, goes out into the bush to go be like used on native plantings, like a bit of a reforestation project on my partner's whenua. In saying that, there's been some kind of recent conversations about even using something like that, something tapu, like those wood chips on native plantings that are then used for rongoa. So yeah, again, you might want to have those questions among your family, like if you're going to be using a certain kawakawa tree or certain trees to collect berries or leaves for rongoa, you might not want to put your hair or your nails or carving wood chips on those plants either. So yeah, it's honestly, it has been a long learning journey for us. These kind of questions come up as you're going. You kind of think you're on the right track, and then tohunga goes, "Are you sure you want to be doing that?" And it's like, "Oh, okay," like redirect, like another kind of pathway. So yeah, it's constant learning and constant adapting to that. Yeah. Other pātai, Crystal hasn't sent me any other pātai, so I'm just gonna open the chat. Oh, thoughts on coffee grounds. Lots given out free by cafes, but some people say they're too strong for composting methods. We use them in ours. I haven't done much research into if it's too strong. I know it is, coffee grounds are considered nitrogen. Hey, Paul. I'm just like looking for Paul's nod here. Coffee grounds are considered nitrogen, and they're quite acidic. And so you want to watch the amounts you put in, I guess. We get some from a local cafe down here, and we just keep it beside the bin, and we just sprinkle in some every now and again. We find there's, even though ours is a hot compost, on the outer edges, we have heaps of worms, and they seem to love the coffee grounds. So yeah, we use them. Again, it might, it's something you'll learn from your own composting journey as well, I think. Is it? Okay. So I'm not scrolling up, so I'm just like looking at the questions, the most recent questions. But is it possible to compost oil, or what's a good way of disposing of it? Lovely question. I don't know. Disposing of oil. I'll open that to the group, I think, if anyone has any opinions, or like, we have oil on our kai, I guess, and the kai scrap's going, but we've never poured oil straight into the compost, like lots of oil. Whenever we do like kind of use a decent amount of oil, which is not often in our whare, we put it on the garden, and that's just not our food garden, like just we have a bit of a like kind of bushy area, so we just kind of put it out there because you don't want to wash it down the sink. That's what I do know. Oh yeah, can't use oil in compost as it smothers the microorganisms. Yeah, so I think it's one of those things that you kind of learn as you go. You might put something in, and next day, like you can kind of, I don't know how to say it, but you kind of start a relationship with your worms and with your microorganisms, and you can tell when they're really not loving stuff. Like I know for ours, like we'll put something in, we'll come back, and there's just the worm activity is crazy, and it's like, oh yeah, they love that thing. And then other things you can tell they're kind of avoiding. So like we might put something in, and it's almost like no worms are around that thing. They've all kind of moved to the other side of the compost. Yeah, I guess, would oil be nitrogen? That's a great question as well. You guys are really giving me these hard questions. I don't know if oil is nitrogen. I would expect so, because yeah, kai. Yeah, hot oil to kill weeds. That's a good idea, I reckon. Yeah. Okay. Any more patai? What about meat? Oh, meat's a great question. So depends what kind of compost you have. So we're really lucky. This compost that I'll take you guys over to see is a hot compost, and it's rat proof, so we can put meat in our compost. Worms don't generally like meat, but there's heaps of other microorganisms that play, and the heat that play in our compost, and so it decomposes. If you're doing a cold compost, I wouldn't recommend putting meat in there. Well, not in huge amounts either. You know, like if you're mostly vegetarian, maybe you have meat once a week and there's a little bit of scraps, you could put it in your cold compost. But just be careful if your compost isn't rat proof or pet proof, that you might be attracting something to it. Yeah, so depends on what kind of compost you have, and it's animal proofing, I guess. We're really lucky here. We can essentially put anything in our compost. Activators like charcoal, shells, yeah. Charcoal, oh yeah, I see, sorry. Charcoal is a nitrogen. We put bones in ours. Shells go in our potholes in the driveway. But you can't, like, I was talking to Tim from Carbon Cycle. He says you can put shells in your compost. Helps if they're broken down. And they're not going to break down, like if you break them down, like, I don't know, by smashing them a bit, they're not going to break down quickly, bones or shells. So we have had bones in ours. We find fish frames break down really quickly, but any other kind of thicker bones, seem to go through our composting process and we have to put them back in to go for another round. We don't get rid of them in one round of composting, which I'll show you what that means. Different between hot compost and cold compost is the heat, essentially. So hot compost is what we've got, gets up to 60 degrees. And it's just because of the way it's built, I guess, and the processes that are used. Cold compost has a lot more airflow, less turning, and it doesn't reach those high temperatures. What about ash? We put it in fine layers. Yeah, ash is good. Ash is nitrogen. Oh, weird one I learned the other day. Chicken poo is very, very high in nitrogen. We have a chicken that lives by our compost, and so poop's been going in there. Any manure, like horse manure or something like that, nitrogen. We don't put any, I don't think, we don't, and I think it's not recommended to put any meat-eating animals' poo in compost, so no dogs or cats tickle in the compost. And I think that's just because of certain toxins and those things shouldn't go into your compost. Okay. Researching the benefits of insect to pre-processed nitrogen to rich food waste before adding to compost. Oh, sounds cool. That's my thought. Sounds cool. Yeah, so so much cool chat happening, which is really awesome. Hopefully you guys are seeing that and making connections in the chat. We tikanga around animal poop. See, this was in the tapu noa conversation. It was interesting to me that certain animals are allowed in the compost, but yeah, we're allowed to put vegetable eating manure in our compost, and our koma are all good with that. Yeah. Oh, and they're from Annie. Yeah. Oh yes, that's a really good point, Annie. So what things have been treated with? So if you have a community compost and you're taking things from the community, being aware of what the processes, what chemicals might have been used on those things is really important. So around here, we're really lucky. We had a mowing man who used spray, and so we couldn't put the clippings in our compost because that spray would kill the microorganisms in the compost. We recently got some new mowing crew, and they don't use spray. They're happy not to use spray. And so now, I waited a while, obviously, but now those clippings can go in. Same thing what Annie says about manure. You've got to be really careful that they haven't, horses and cows haven't been treated for, maybe Paul will tell me, there's a certain thing that a lot of farmers give cows, I think, to keep them healthy, but that remains in their poo and is not good for compost, and I've forgotten what it is. Yes, dewormers, yeah. Oh, and yeah, dewormers and pets, and yeah, so just be wary of what you're putting in. Ask lots of questions. People are generally pretty good, you know. Yeah, if you're letting people put their green waste in, checking if they've put any spray on it first, that kind of thing. Any medications for any animal stuff. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to leave you because I'm going to switch to my phone so that we can go for a walk. And it will just be a quick kind of 10-minute show. And if you have more questions, you can get in touch with us. But I'm just going to switch to my phone. So while I do that, I'll be keen to have you put in the chat what learning that you're taking away from this one. But yeah, so I'm going to log off on this screen and log on another screen, and I'll see you guys in a second.
Okay. Can you hear me and see me? Yeah, so if you haven't been to Whangarei before, or maybe you have been to Whangarei, but next time you come, if you haven't been here, Hauota Cultural Centre. So the centre was built to restore, renew, oh gosh, I've been put on the spot. Restore and renew the culture and identity of young Māori in Tai Tokerau through the arts. So through whakairo or carving, through rāranga or weaving, through all different types of mahi toi. And we're really lucky to also have a community compost on site. And so we were gifted some funding from we were given some funding from an awesome program called Compost Connection that's based up here in the north, and also from Parakore to build this awesome 4-bay hot compost. So this is a compost from Carbon Cycle. You've heard of them. If you are thinking of, so I'm just going to put my gloves on. If you're thinking of setting up a community compost, even if you are not necessarily, like, you don't know if you're going to go with Carbon Cycle, who do kind of these big composts, I highly recommend getting in touch because their team is so awesome and helpful. So they have this really awesome guy called Tim who helped us understand how many bins we would need, how many hours of maintenance were required from how much input we had. So he's really good at working out that kind of formula of, yes, you'll have this much food scraps going in, so you need this much carbon going in, which will require this much maintenance and turning over at these times, etc., etc. So yeah, he's really awesome at working out those formulas and giving advice based on that. And so yeah, we're really lucky to have one of their composts, and even awesomer, the wood comes from Hauota Bay. If you've been here in Whangarei, it's just on the way out to the heads. Yeah, Macrokapa from Hauota Bay, and the slats were cut by one of our carvers here at Hihiawa. And so how it works for us is we have four bins. This is our bin number 1. And so when people come to visit, they can put their food scraps or their carbon, so food scraps or nitrogen, in this bin. I'll show you what we've got. I'll see if I can turn my screen around. No, it's not going to let me because I'm wearing gloves. So hopefully you can see that. So in there we've got food scraps, pizza, cardboard, Red Bull, packaging with a sticker that probably won't compost, compostable packaging, brown leaves, bags, yeah, more compostable packaging. I think that's like a banana bread or something it looks like. And then the further down you get, like leaves and hay and whatnot. And so yeah, this is like our bin number 1. Everyone can input into here, and then once a week I come in and check and see if there's enough carbon in here. We have a lot of users that only have nitrogen, like they only have food scraps to get rid of. And so I often have to add the carbon to help balance that out. And so as you can see, like there's, I don't know if you can see, but there's quite a few fruit flies hanging around. And that's because that nitrogen is just out in the open. We usually ask people, it doesn't always happen, to cover any nitrogen or any food scraps with carbon, and we're really lucky, like there's heaps of carbon around if they don't have any on them, or yeah, they can use ripped up cardboard or whatever. But anyway, so that's my mahi, is coming here once a week to kind of assess what's happening, add more carbon if it's needed, and give it a turnover. So that's our first bin. And I know it sounds hard, like that people are putting in food chips without covering them, but we made the decision that we would allow for direct access to the compost, which isn't what everyone wants to do and shouldn't be what everyone does, because your composter works for you. But we allow direct access because me and my partner are the only ones that really have the capacity to look after the compost, and we wanted to make it as, I guess, least amount of mahi for us. And so putting the scraps in some other bin and then us sorting out what can go in the compost or not was too much double handling. So instead we let everyone put it into bin 1, and then we do the mahi to take out any rubbish that shouldn't be there, add more carbon, give it a turnaround, that kind of thing. So this is our second bin. So once the first bin is full, and that just keeps compacting, people fill it up, and then next week it goes back down, fill it up, goes back down. But when that bin is full, it comes into the second bin, and by then it's starting to look like some kind of compost. You can see all the worms there. It probably isn't hot enough in here at the moment. It should be hotter. You can see like compostable packaging, forks and stuff. We're having a lot of discussions around compostable packaging. You might have heard of something called PFAS, which is a kind of collection of chemicals that is often used in compostable packaging, and which is a forever chemical, so it stays in. Even once the material that it's on has broken down, those chemicals are in the compost. At the moment, it's a conversation we're having with our community around, could we start to transition away from single use? Even though it's compostable, it's still single use. Can we move away from those single use items and get PFAS out of our compost? But yeah, that's kind of an ongoing discussion. But yeah, so you see in here, lots of big sticks still, but it's starting to get more compost looking. Big avocado. I think this avocado pit has been around the circle about 4 times now, and it's still a big avocado pit. So highly recommend like chopping these or breaking them down if you can. But yeah, and so we use a couple of coffee sacks from down the road just to keep it nice and warm in there. And then yeah, it goes to the third bin. The fourth bin is our final compost, and that's I unfortunately can't show you that today because we emptied it out just last week, just empty. But that's where it would eventually come out as beautiful compost, essentially. I'm just going to turn the camera around. Yeah, so that's our compost. Definitely have had a lot of learnings from it, and highly recommend or encourage you to just have a go. Really, a lot of our learnings didn't come until we got the compost and like started using it. You know, there's so many questions that come up beforehand, so many potential issues that could happen, but they didn't match up with what actually happened. So things that we thought were going to be issues haven't been. Like we thought, oh, direct access to the compost, people are going to fill it with rubbish, and it hasn't happened, which has been awesome. Like every now and again we get a couple of bits of rubbish, like maybe someone put their old McDonald's in there, although that's mostly paper now. The other week I found a vape in there, so got that out. But yeah, so there is a couple sometimes bits of rubbish, but it's definitely not as big of a problem as we expected. So yeah, just have a go, I reckon. And I'm just seeing some questions coming through. So yeah, all the slats on the side come out. So pretty much this whole compost is pull apart. So you take off the lids, take off the metal part, and then you can pull the slats out. And so all the slats in the middle come out, and so you can move. So what we do is we move the compost from bin 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 by pulling the walls out and just moving the compost over So yeah, it's really awesome for that. And it's got a mesh at the bottom, a mesh kind of metal layer, and it has holes in it, so it lets all the good stuff in but keeps wrapped out. So yeah, we can put meat, bread, dairy, anything in our compost, and it eventually breaks down, and it's without attracting too many things, which is good. Sorry, I am seeing a couple other questions come through. How often do you turn your compost? So I aerate our compost every 1 or 2 weeks, and that's just to keep help keep heat, like turning it helps with our heat, keeping our heat high. So we aerate it every 1 or 2 weeks, but we do the turn from box to box only maybe every 2 or 3 months, and we could do it more often. We could do it every 2 weeks, but like the bins could deal with the compost by turning it every 2 weeks, but we just don't have that level of input, and we want to increase what gets put in our compost. But yeah, at the moment our level of input means we only have to turn it every 2 to 3 months from bin to bin. And so yeah, like probably get a full box of finished compost every half a year or just a bit longer than that. But definitely there are people out there. I know Sustainable Kaipara based in Mangawhai. They have 6 bins and they turn every week from bin to bin. So their compost is in its system, for 6 weeks, and that's it, and then it's out. So yeah, it can be done a lot faster. I think for carbon cycle bins, whatever goes in should be in the process for 6 weeks minimum before it is safe to use as compost, before all the weed seeds are gone, any kind of baddies from the kai have gone. Yeah. Is there any more pārtai? I kind of seen them coming in, but I'll just try and open the chat. Yeah, community composting, pulling out packaging. We get fruit stickers, that's kind of our most common one. And yeah, I'm just saying main common things not good for the compost is bread, cheese and meat. Yep, so most normal compost, you wouldn't put bread, cheese, meat, dairy in your compost. We're really lucky with ours that it can compost those things, and there's 2 reasons for that. It's a hot compost and it's rat proof, and so the microbes that are involved in hot composting are able to compost those things. In a cold compost, usually you're working with worms, and worms don't like meat and dairy and bread, but the microorganisms in a hot compost, which I can't tell you exactly what those are, but they seem to like those things. Tim from Carbon Cycle says we could compost a human body in here if we really wanted to. Like it can break down anything. Isn't it crazy? I'm like, okay, let's not tell too many people that, but yeah, so we're really lucky with this compost and highly recommend them for like a community composting project because of that. We've found that has gotten rid of what was a huge barrier for us or for the community. We found that the barrier to composting for a lot of people here was the rules. So what can go in, what can't go in. A lot of people up here are used to food scraps, and those food scraps go into pigs. But food scraps for pigs, you can put anything in there, like pigs, well, if they're like our pigs, they'll eat anything. And so people are used to putting all their food scraps in one bucket. And so when you try and introduce them to composting, and you're kind of like, oh, you can't put citrus, oh, you can't put bread, oh, you can't put meat, that can sometimes act as a barrier for people. It becomes too difficult. And so because we can say, yeah, we can accept any food scraps, we just kind of need a whole bunch of carbon to help with that with those food scraps, yeah, we found that a lot of people are more engaged in doing it. Sorry, I just seen a question coming in. Here to mō te hui ātau. I think it's in May. We're not doing a hui ātau, Crystal, we're doing hui ārohe.
Yeah, so we're
oh yeah.
Sorry, we're transitioning from hui ātau, the one national hui, to 4 local hui, so hui ārohe, and you can find those events pinned to the top of our Facebook page, and we'll also send out more information via email.
Yeah, and if you're in the north, come to the Te Huku one, I'll be there. I think it's in Kaitaia at the REAP building. But yeah, so anyway, and if you're ever in Whangarei, come visit our compost. Loves having visitors. We're just like, there's the cultural centre just there, compost just here. And at the moment, our the end product is going just to locals that are keen, that have fed into the compost. So, for example, the cafe that we get is just down the road, and we get coffee grounds from them. We took them a bag of compost, gave a few to one of our kaumātua who's got some gardens, another to a whaia that works in the cultural centre. But eventually, we're hoping to have a garden here at Hihiawa Marakai, and to use the compost for that. But yeah, I think that's all. Any other questions? Maybe send them to Crystal, or message our Facebook page or something, and Crystal will redirect you to me or anything like that. But yeah, there's parakore kaimahi all around the motu that are keen to help with your composting journeys and help answer your questions, support you with what you need. So yeah, why am I? Tono mai, give us a call, get in touch. And yeah, I am going to finish us off with a karakia. Thank you, Crystal. I knew that might be something that I would forget. So yeah, thank you all for coming. It's been an awesome morning. Yeah, just really appreciate that you've taken the time to join us here on this Zoom, and hopefully you've gotten some connections and learnings out of it. Ka pai. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, kia te whai o tō tātou a riki ai hukaiti te aroha, te atua me te whiwhinga taitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, āmene.